Hello, my name's Carl and I'm the TEFL guy. I've been lucky enough to have worked in the field of English as a foreign language as a teacher, as an examiner, as a teacher trainer, online, face to face. I think I've done it all over the last 15 or so years. I've worked in places such as China, Vietnam, Japan, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Iraq, Spain, Italy, and in the UK. So I make videos where I talk about the world of TEFL, how to be a better teacher, how to get into TEFL, and if you're already into TEFL, stuff that might inspire you. Recently, I sat down and did a Zoom call with a good friend of mine who works in Japan. His name is Jaime, and he has worked on the JET program and he's worked for language schools. He's also worked for universities in Japan. He loves it out there. He's a real expert on it. And we talk about a wide range of things, such as how to get into the JET program, what it's like, living in Japan in general, some of the things and some of his thoughts about it, and how to get into working at universities and what you need to do in order to get full-time tenured work. So if that's the sort of thing that you're interested in, please watch this video and please like and subscribe to my channel. Right, let's get into the video of my interview with Jaime. As I said, we're here with a good friend of mine called Jaime, and he's been a teacher in Japan for quite a long time. And I'm going to ask him a load of questions so you can find out more about TEFL in Japan. So Jaime, thanks very much for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you for asking me.
No problem at all. So tell us about your current situation in terms of teaching in Japan. Where do you work?
So I'm based in Nagoya City, which is in Aichi Prefecture. It's kind of commonly known as the belly button of Japan because we're pretty much smack bang in the middle of the country. So if you were going from Tokyo down to Osaka, you would basically have to pass through Nagoya, which the bullet train, the Shinkansen.
And where do you teach?
So right now I'm teaching at an all-women's university. In Nagoya City, pretty much on the outskirts of the city. So that's my main day job, Monday to Thursday. And then on Friday, which is my research day, I work part-time at a different university, which is pretty common practice. Most people over here do that. They got their main job 4 or 5 days a week, and then they'll teach somewhere else for 1 or 2 classes as well.
And universities don't mind that?
No, it's pretty much expected. The general rule is with your main contract at your main job, they usually say you're only allowed 2 classes elsewhere. Some universities are a bit more lax on it, but that's generally the done thing. And sometimes your university will ask you for like a piece of paper, and they say, "Oh, you need to send this to your part-time employer," just for them to say, "Yeah, he's only doing 2 classes."
And was this the first town you've lived in Japan, or did you live somewhere else before?
So initially I lived in next prefecture, actually, so not that far away, in Gifu prefecture, which is right next to Aichi.
Because we went to university together, that's how we know each other, and we did a degree in linguistics and teaching English as a foreign language.
Yeah.
Did you do that degree to come to Japan? Was that the plan for it?
Yeah, basically, I think when I applied for the university, I was living in Australia at the time because I was traveling and I was working, and I thought I can't do this forever. So what have been 25, 26 then. So as a mature student, you can, as in UK universities, you can pretty much get not on any degree, but as a mature student, you're paying for yourself and whatnot, so you can usually get into most places. So I sent the admissions office an email, and I was kind of thinking I should probably go back at some point. And Swansea, my brother lived in Swansea, so I knew I could live with him. So I thought I didn't initially think it'd go to Japan per se, but I thought I definitely wanted to travel more. And I needed a qualification to help me travel more, basically. And Japan was on my list of places to come, but I basically applied for the JET program during my final year at university and got accepted. So
I'll tell you a funny story about I actually didn't get onto the JET program when I applied because I was actually late for the interview, which is obviously a big no-no in Japan. I was late to the Japanese embassy in London, which is this beautiful building.
It is nice.
A quick story. My dad took me, and my dad thought he knew the best way to get there. He didn't know the best way to get there, and I was late for the interview. Anyway, so
Yeah.
Tell us about the JET application process. Was that quite easy?
No, 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 no. It's really long, convoluted. It basically starts almost a year before you leave, right? So I was going into my final year of university in the UK, so that's September, October start. And I think the application for the following year closes at the end of October, November, if I remember rightly, something like that. So I'd only just finished the second year, it's going into the third year of university, and so I did the application, and mine was slightly different as well because I was applying with my girlfriend at the time who was living in England. So we applied as a couple, not a married couple, but just as like a couple. And that's, they tried to place you, they say they tried to place you, together, but they can't guarantee it basically. Anyway, so the actual process, the paperwork it's pretty hefty. And you have to go through it a lot. And then there's different stages. Just like initial screening application, and they go through your application process in more detail. And then I think you can maybe correct me, the interviews are February-ish, I think.
I remember it being cold. I remember it being cold.
Yeah, yeah. And then you don't actually
in the
find
interviews, how thorough are the interviews?
The interview itself wasn't that great, I think, because I think I was a little bit later on the day. I could tell it was a British guy and a Japanese guy, and Japanese guy had very good English. I could tell by the time they were doing my interview that I think those two guys had, I think they'd had a pretty longish day. Because like they were both sat there with their sleeves rolled up and the tie was undone. They're just kind of like...
Ask me questions sort of about what I know about Japanese culture, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like, from my memory, that the questions I were asked were sort of more about Japanese culture instead of sort of linguistics and things like this, because there was a little grammar test, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know about you. Is that the sort of questions you can remember being asked?
Yeah, it was definitely more about Japan itself, why I want to go to Japan, and they sort of. There was a little bit about the fact that I'd done linguistics degree and teaching English degree part. And they also asked questions about me being with my partner and what if we weren't placed together. But yeah, it was definitely more on the cultural and that type of side rather than actual teaching. I don't remember any specific questions about teaching. Because, they don't really expect you to be good teachers, right? Because, they take anyone from any particular background of education. As long as you got a degree, it doesn't matter what it's in, right? So
yeah, I don't really feel like my degree in linguistics sort of necessarily helped me in that interview or to get onto the JET program.
Yeah,
it's helped me in other ways, but I don't think for the JET program. So then you came to Japan.
Yeah, so I think I only found out, I want to say 3-4 weeks, maybe a month before we were due to leave. So you're due to leave right at the end of July, maybe even the 1st of August. I think I find out, towards the end of June-ish, I think. And I can't remember if they say, okay, you've been accepted. Then you got to wait even further then before they tell you where it is. I think I only found out the actual where. It was like, it was 2 or 3 weeks, I think. Or it wasn't that far from when I actually left. And they said, you're going to Gifu. I was like, great. Where's Gifu? And obviously, first thing you do is
I have heard stories of people being placed in the middle of, sort of Japanese countryside, really, in quite rural areas. But you weren't placed in...
where I was initially, it was pretty rural, to be honest. It wasn't like mega... I've been to a lot more rural places in Japan, so I could have been sent like real countryside, but no, it was like a small... They call it a city. It's not a city, it's a town. Ogaki. A lovely place. I loved it. And you know what? When we bought this house, where I'm now, last year, I actually said to my wife, like, I wouldn't mind moving back to Gifu. Like, I just loved it. It was such a... it just really suited me. It was a really small little town.
Just on that, because I think a lot of people think of going to work in Japan, they just think of Tokyo. And I think you've got to go to Tokyo if you go to Japan for sure. And maybe go work there for a few months, but Japan is about so much more than Tokyo, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. There's, obviously there's pluses and minuses to every situation, right? But I felt like being in a smaller area, you really got to know Japanese people, or maybe the culture side a bit more. On the flip side, do you remember Carl Kaz, who came to Swansea and did the same degree
Yeah, he
course?
was he was an international student that was at our on our course, yeah, from
Yeah,
Japan.
so he was Japanese, and he said he specifically chose to go to Swansea because it was one of the few pretty decent universities with very limited Japanese people living in and
Mm.
around. So, and he wanted to improve his English during the time he was there. So, on the kind of flip side, that was kind of basically what I was doing. 'Cause if I'd been end up straight in Nagoya or Osaka or Tokyo, I probably would have found more international friends straight away, and then I probably would have spoken more English than Japanese. So I was kind of plunked right in the middle of. And this was before smartphones as well, so there's no apps to help you out with translation or anything like that. It
Yes.
was all paper dictionaries and stuff. I remember, before I left the apartment, because I had basically zero Japanese language knowledge. Just going to the supermarket was, I had a little bag of, okay, I got my little notebook of what useful words I've been noting down. I had a little dictionary as well to fit in your pocket. I needed all these things before I could even go to the shop, and I still made mistakes.
Well, I think just finishing that bit. I think anyone that um, watching this, I think they'll know that probably in the big cities, it's not as easy to meet people sometimes as it is in
Mm.
sort of small rural, not quite countryside, but town areas.
Yeah.
I know that I found in Tokyo that it was quite easy to meet international people, but I found it less easy to meet Japanese people for sure.
Yeah, like
So the JET program you got on that, and what was the school like that you taught on?
um so I was teaching in Ogaki Minami High School. So Minami means south, so it's in the south part of the city. And I'll be honest, the level wasn't great. Um
The level of the students.
yeah.
Yeah.
Motivation probably wasn't that great either. And all the students are nice, but the interest in English was very low, generally speaking. And the level was pretty low as well. Um, Again, they're all well enough, nice, well behaved, but it was just like, no, they just couldn't care about English, basically. Um, and it was like about 35 minutes odd cycle from my apartment. And I had to cycle every day. There was no choice. I wasn't allowed to get a car. There was public transport. It would have taken a lot longer to do public transport because the station was so far from my house. And then the station on the other side, so it was just, yeah, so it was basically cycle. And it was a classroom of 40 kids, basically, more or less half and half boys and girls. I remember walking into my first classroom and all I could see was just, because everyone's got the same haircut, right? Everyone's got black hair, usually quite shortish, and even the girls have shortish kind of hair. And there was like 20 girls this side, 20 boys this side, and I was like paraded at the front. Uh, it's like, this is our foreigner. And I was like, oh. I had made these grand lesson plans. I was like, oh, I got a degree in linguistics and teaching English, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna nail this, and it totally dive bombed. Like it's just,
Really?
I just totally overestimated the students' language ability because I thought, everyone's like, oh yeah, Japanese students they start learning English from the age of 6 or 7,
So did they
and
just throw you in front of this? How old were the students?
so I was in senior high school and I was teaching first years, so 15, 16 ish.
So they just threw, and were you totally in charge of those lessons? Was there a syllabus to
No,
follow?
so generally on Jet they will do team teaching. So I had one supervisor who I'm still very good friends with now, Fukuda Sensei. She was fantastic. She was awesome. Like she really helped so much with the outside of school stuff, but she was also really good on the teaching side as well. But I didn't teach every class with her. I think I taught 3 or 4 classes. In total, I think it was about 12 classes a week I was teaching. About 50 minutes, I think they were. And I was teaching with at least 2 or 3 other Japanese English teachers. And there was a textbook, which is diabolical. It was so bad. And luckily, Fukuda Sensei was like, oh, you don't have to follow the textbook. We can do other stuff if you want. And really, the textbook was so bad. I was like, oh, let's try and do my own materials. And of course, you speak to other people who've been there for a little bit longer. And there's in our apartment where they put us to live, there was other Jets, other ALTs there as well who'd been there for like a few years. So you got speaking to people, and people help you out with ideas and what.
Did you feel you had support as a new sort of teacher to the world?
Uh, Looking back on it now, probably not a great deal, but I think Jeds have a lot more support than if you do private ALT, so ALT assistant language teacher, right? Uh, I think if you do like private, there's lots of other companies out there. Can't you know, Interac is one of the big ones, and what's the other ones? I can't remember now. But yeah, I think you have a lot less support with
Okay.
those private companies. Is my understanding. Obviously, I've never talked with them, so I can't say for sure. But
And
yeah,
you ended up doing Jet for 2 years, was it?
so 4 years in total.
Or
I did at the end of my first year. There was like a massive financial scandal in my prefecture, and they went from I can't remember the exact number. It was like 130 odd jets ALTs down to 7.
wow,
So it was a massive cut,
that
obviously.
was a massive cut. Yes,
Yeah.
that's strange.
So
Yeah.
so Gifu prefect is divided into 5, 6, 7, 8, bigger areas, small areas, sorry. And they try to keep one from each area, and maybe or two in a bigger one. So there's like 6 of us, 7 of us, high school ALTs. I think the elementary and junior high they kept about the same numbers, but the high school ALTs because they pay differently, right?
Yeah.
So for the high school education is from the prefectural budget, whereas the other ones are from a different budget. Anyway, so I got kept mainly. I'm saying because it was my background in linguistics and teaching, to be honest. And I think I made a good impression, I believe, in my first year. So then I was teaching at that one school, and I was also visiting another high school. And then at the end of that, I think they got rid of another 2 teachers, and they moved me from where I was. They moved me to Gifu City, so only about 15 miles down the road, but now I was in Gifu City rather than in the outskirts. And then that was really good because they actually put me to work in it was they had an international department basically, so I was being well utilized then at this new school, and that was really good because I was teaching the international communication department students, and they went to Australia as a school trip in
Okay.
the second year.
So they were a bit more
Um,
motivated.
they were really motivated. They all had really good English at the start anyway, and even coming in as a first year student, they had good English. Second year, they go to Australia as a homestay. I think it was like 2-3 weeks, but that's like one of the big things. And even the third year students, they go on to good universities, basically, some of the top universities in the area and also in Tokyo and stuff. So they put me to work there, basically, and I was being properly used then, and my background was being used. And I actually ended up teaching some third year classes by myself, which technically isn't allowed because you need a teacher license in Japan to teach a class by yourself. But we decided to split the class, and I took one half, and the other teacher took the other half, and I just did lots of good speaking activities with them. And
Nice.
yeah,
So did you just come to the end of? Could you have carried on with Jet, or did you just feel like it was
yeah.
time
So
to finish?
basically, it's a 1 year renewal contract, right? And usually they say you can only renew up to 3 years. Initially, at the start of the Jet program, I think it was only 2 years. Then they extended to 3 years, and then they said it was a real recent development. I think maybe my year or the year before was the first year that they said I can't remember the exact wording, and I'm going to big myself up a little bit here. It was something like exceptional or above and beyond.
Okay.
NLTs are allowed to recontract for 4 and 5 years. So I got the 4th year because they really wanted me to stay. So I did the 4th year. And they wanted me to do the 5th year as well. But by now I was 34-ish, I think. About 34, and I thought, so just get married. And the money is good, and especially where I was living, I was only paying 5,000 yen a month, which is in pounds, I don't know what's that, it's like 20, 30 odd pound a month rent.
Wow.
So exactly, it's basically free.
Because a lot of people do worry about the money in Japan and how expensive it is. But I actually found I could save quite a bit of money, even living in Tokyo.
Yeah, it's it's not that expensive if you know what you're doing. Basically, obviously you could go out and spend.
However much you want to on a night out.
Yeah. I remember it was in January, and I had to sign the recontracting form. Basically, that by that day the deadline was up, and I'm in an hour in. I remember I was on Skype or on the phone to my dad, and whether I'd mentioned it to him previously or whatever, and he said, "Oh, well, why didn't you come back and do your masters?" And I went, actually, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that.
Did you do that masters in order to come back to Japan? Because you were married by that time, yeah?
Yeah, well, I thought I'd heard other people moving from basically what I was doing, ALT stuff, and moving into university work. And I'd done a few elementary and junior high school visits during my 4 years in Jet. I didn't mind it. It was kind of fun, but I thought I was into a bit more of a serious teaching, if you know what I mean. I was like, I don't think I've got the energy just to play games and
Yeah.
bounce around all day.
There is a
Like
lot
so.
of that with teaching the kids, isn't there? That's the
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I thought, I wouldn't mind senior high school, like the high school I was working at for those last 2 years. Like something like that would have been good because really good, dedicated students, serious about learning English, but you could also have a good laugh with them as well. You could, have a joke with them. So, students like that, basically, or university, is what I thought would be better for me. And then basically everyone said to get into university teaching, you need a master's, basically, at least. So I
Because
thought,
I
okay.
think that is part of living in Japan long term. I think you do have to keep at the qualifications if you want to have like a serious job, maybe, and also sort of more of a permanent job. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. Like I was either looking at trying to get sort of full time work with the British Council, but that basically meant moving to Tokyo because all the other offices in Japan at that time had sort of closed down. They only had the Tokyo office, and me and my wife didn't fancy doing that. So masters, I thought, well, Gifu, where I was living, had plenty of universities, and Nagoya had universities as well. So that seemed like the better choice. So yeah, basically you need the minimum of a master's
Because
to even start with part-time work
yeah,
in
because
universities.
when I was in Japan, I didn't have any sort of postgrad qualifications. I had just the degree in the CELTA, but I
Yeah,
did really find that I need to go for a master's if I wanted slightly higher paid jobs and jobs
yeah,
which are sort of seen as sort of more professional. I think instead of just sort of the language school jobs that I was doing.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Um,
So
you know,
what qualifications do you have? You got your degree in linguistics, your
so
masters.
linguistics, applied linguistics and TEFL is a
Yeah.
degree. Got CELTA, which I did at the same time as the master's, so I got the master's in TEFL as well. I've been IELTS speaking examiner for 7 or 8 years.
Do you
And
find that the Japanese universities care that you've got a CELTA?
at first, no. And even some of the older kind of universities didn't really know what it was, to be honest with you. But now, more recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, it's really started to. I wouldn't say they start asking for it, but it definitely helps for the universities that know properly about it. Like basically the better universities, the good universities, they know what CELTA is, and they know that if you got a CELTA, then that means you can teach English.
Hmm.
So it definitely helped me get a job in my last two universities, I would say.
But do you know people who you work with who don't have CELTAs?
Yeah,
Yeah. So it's not
and
it's not
a lot of them don't know what it is. As
okay.
in the other people working there. I remember my last university where I was full time, and I remember I was doing some photocopying, and this American guy came over to me and he's, "Oh, what are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, I'm just photocopying this. I'm just working across the road, Nagoya University. I was doing some work for the British Council, um, off campus, basically off site, and I was telling him about the job and the pay. He's like, "Oh, that sounds really good. Could you help me out?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, have you got a CELTA?" And he went, "Oh, I don't need CELTA. I've got a master's and I've got a teacher license from the U States." I said, "Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you have, and he was older than me, so probably a lot more teaching experience." I said, "But with the British Council, you still need a CELTA." And he goes, "Oh, that's ridiculous. That's stupid. What's a CELTA going to do?" I was like, "Don't shoot the messenger.
Yeah.
You asked me about
That
the."
is something if you're getting into TEFL, that's something you've got to be a bit aware of, isn't it? I know a lot of American people they sort of go down the more academic side of things. That's what
Yeah,
it's seen
yeah,
as more. Whereas
yeah,
I mean, the British Council in 2022 is they have their problems in terms of COVID and all this kind of thing, but
mm.
they definitely do pride the CELTA more than the theoretical qualifications. But I
Yeah.
think
Like
I know you need a degree to get onto the work visa. Is that right? I think it's pretty impossible to get to Japan on a work visa without a degree. Yeah.
yeah, I think you need a minimum degree. I know. a few people here who have come on maybe a spouse visa or like a tourist visa,
Yes.
and then have done like a long distance or open university degree, and that's been okay, or long distance masters
I
as
know you
well.
can, because there is a working holiday visa for Japan, isn't there? So,
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's
so
right.
I
Yeah,
know,
you
I
need to be
think you
under
don't
30.
need. Sorry. So,
I think you need to be under 30 to do it. Is that right?
okay, but I don't think you need a degree to get that visa, do you? So,
No, I don't think
I
so.
think you
No.
could probably go to Japan on that, find work when you're out there. But I guess you're taking a bit of a gamble, would you say?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And generally speaking, like the immigration process is pretty, when you hear to renew your visa and stuff is pretty easy, it's pretty straightforward, and they're really helpful actually in the immigration center.
That's
But it's also,
interesting because I found in Tokyo they were terrible.
oh, really?
Found them really unhelpful, and the queues were long, and all
I'll
sorts of
queues
things.
are long. I mean, they can't help that. But all the staff I've ever spoken to, they've always been really good and really helpful, and a lot of them speak pretty good English and stuff as well.
Okay, oh, that's good. My terrible Japanese probably didn't help. So, what if you looking back now? What would you like to have known about Japan before you came over?
um, teaching wise,
Yeah, teaching wise or living there. Let's go with teaching wise first.
uh, teaching wise, don't expect anyone to answer a question.
In terms of the students.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, to be honest, even uh, some of the admin staff. Japan is a great society. Obviously, I love living here, and it's definitely the worst places to live. But it's very much a case sometimes. It is like this in other countries as well. It's not specific to Japan, but um, you can be talking about something, and then if you didn't ask a very specific question, um, they won't tell you. They won't volunteer information a lot of the time. Um, and then you find out somehow through someone else, and you go, "Well, I was talking to you yesterday. Why didn't you tell me? But I had to do this. Oh, you didn't ask me about that. Well, that's because I didn't know about it." So, yeah, sometimes you have to be very specific with your questions, and then it kind of translates into the classroom. And obviously on CELTA they kind of teach this out of you, but if you stand at the front of the classroom and you say, "Okay, any questions?" you will. I mean, I've been teaching you now for 12 years or more, and very rarely does anyone. To be honest, I don't use that question much, but if you want an answer to a question, you ask someone specifically,
Yeah.
or you call your concept check.
So no, so you wish you knew that the students are going to be even more passive than you sort of thought they were going to be.
Yes, 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 and don't overestimate the English ability. Even though English has been made compulsory now, I believe, from basically when they start school and 5 or 6 years old. It's getting better, but still very much book based and there's a lot of input. So it's all reading and to certain extent some writing. They don't do a lot of output, speaking wise or listening stuff. So
It's a shame because they
uh,
spend so much on English learning, but
yeah,
I
and
don't
it's
think it's really lifted the level that the amount of money they're spending on it
no,
justifies.
even like a research project I did the other day. I was comparing what you call it, scores of proficiency tests across there's like 4 or 5 different proficiency tests like TOEIC, TOEFL, IELTS, and stuff out of all the Asian countries, and there's obviously quite a few poor countries in that list, developing countries, and Japan is still in the bottom 3 or 4. There's
Strange, isn't
places
it?
like Vietnam, Thailand, there's the other places which are far higher up the list than
Yeah.
Japan. And considering Japan is second, third biggest GDP or whatever, such a developed country, and the sort of level of English.
I think also when you go to teach there, you've got to not have too high expectations into how much you can improve them.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know that speaking to some of my colleagues when I worked in Tokyo, they were like, they're not improving, they're not improving. But I think actually it's just maybe I think just their personality a bit and just the cultural way. Really, you can't make if
yeah,
when I jumped into Vietnam, the students were a bit more active and ready to sort of learn,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
felt like that just really helped them to increase more quickly than
yeah,
Japanese students.
yeah. Definitely, I agree with that. Yeah.
So
for
what about
sure.
living in Japan? Is it generally, because I think people do sometimes think there's a lot of admin and there's all the social politeness and the cultural barriers you've got to break down. I kind of felt that was just sort of a lot in people's imagination, but I don't know what you feel after living there a lot longer than I have.
Um, yeah, there's a lot of admin stuff, a lot of red tape. Japanese people love red tape and meetings and a meeting for a meeting or meeting to decide a committee to decide the meeting. There's a lot of that that goes on. It's getting better. One thing which even now I'm still amazed about, it's kind of like sometimes people sort of make fun, but in many respects, Japan is very analog. So there's a lot of paper. You still can't do a lot of stuff through the internet. Like, you can't make reservations for dentists or doctors or a lot of other stuff like car insurance. We had to renew our car insurance the other day. We had to go to our local branch of the office and actually go there and spend the afternoon, fill in the form and doing this and paying with cash. They didn't take credit card,
Wow.
even though it's a kind of bank. Um, so a lot of things are still very analog. People always joke that they still use fax a lot. I can't even remember the last time I used a fax, me personally, but
They do
admin.
ask for a fax number, don't they, on some forms and things like that.
Yeah. No, I got to start a new job and part-time job, and they asked me to write down my fax number for my office, and I was like, I have no idea.
Nice.
Luckily, it's on my business card, so I found it. But
Still got to have a
yeah,
business
a
card.
lot of stuff like that. It's still very much paper. Hanko. Do you remember doing Hanko, Carl?
What's that? I can't remember that.
That's your little stamp with your name on it.
Oh, yes, yes. That does ring a bell. Yes, that does ring a bell. Yes.
So anything to do with banks or city office or anything like that, you need this, and you can't
Yeah.
get that without a foreigner's residence card.
Yes, that does ring a bell. Yes. I don't think I
And
use mine much, I must admit. So
if
is
you
it
look,
quite easy to rent flats and that kind of thing?
uh, I've been lucky in that when I first got here, my accommodation was sorted by Jet, so I was thankful for that. And then after that, I was married, so uh, my wife basically helped us find somewhere to live. However, it's still pretty difficult sometimes if you are just foreigner by yourself, which obviously is quite a lot of them over here. They can struggle, to be honest, because there's still a lot of places, offices or private landlords that won't rent to foreign people.
Mhm. Yeah. I
Even
know in Tokyo that I tried to go down the sort of looking at the classifieds and renting my own apartment that way. And it was just impossible. I just
yeah,
got nowhere without learning without speaking Japanese well. In Tokyo, I was lucky that there are sort of agencies to help international people.
yeah.
Osaka might have some, I guess, but maybe probably outside of that, it can be a bit more difficult, I would guess.
Yeah, Nagoya. I don't know of any agencies that help with that. Like you might, once people find out about, okay, this particular letting company is quite kind to foreigners, then you'll find that there's like a bunch of foreigners living in this one big apartment building. But yeah, like even previous house, we didn't have a parking space and we had a car, so you have to rent a parking space, and so my wife called up the place, or we went there. Can't remember now, and rented for like 50 quid a month or whatever. And he's like, yeah, it's fine, yeah, no problem. Yeah, you need to fill this and fill this, and yeah, what's the name? And I think he was going to come up my bank, so she gave my name. And then the guy went, no, don't rent to foreigners.
Oh wow.
And,
Just
she
like
turned
that.
around, yeah, and I was working at a really good university. And he went, he's an associate professor at like this really good university. And he's like, oh, yeah, but I've had a bad experience with foreigners. And
Oh,
he
wow.
was trying to say that he was trying to say sort of more Brazilian and Chinese people, but he was basically just said, no, like if I just say no foreigners whatsoever, then that covers me blanket.
I think that is
Bam.
something you've got to be aware of and be ready for. I think if you're going to go to Japan, for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, most jobs if you're applying outside of Japan for a job and they fly you and that kind of thing, they will sort out all your accommodation. It only really becomes a
yeah,
problem if you want to stay long term, I think, in Japan.
yeah, yeah,
So I mean, so I know that most people sort of go to Japan and they might not stay for as long as you have. Do you think it's easy country to stay long term living in?
Yeah, I think it's probably all about the work, right? And if you find your little niche and you find like a good job and you're happy to stay there, um, then as long as they keep renewing your contracts. Obviously, if you're not married to a Japanese person, then you need to be on a work visa, so you'd need the workplace to sort out your work visa, basically. Um, so yeah, as long as you got somewhere that you're happy working and they're happy with you working, then yeah, it's pretty easy. And living wise, especially now with obviously when I came here, the internet was around, but it wasn't kind of a lot of the pages weren't as good as they are now. Amazon certainly wasn't around as much then in Japan, whereas now most of the big companies have a English version of the in Japanese website. So I can pretty much buy most things that you need. Like there's not many things that I would think, oh, I wish I could get this, but I can't get it. It's usually a foreign store that you can go to or on the internet, and even most places, obviously pre-COVID and pre-war stuff, it was pretty easy to get something delivered from Europe, UK, or even States, within like a week or so if you wanted it. Obviously you end up spending a little bit more than if you buy something locally, but yeah, you can pretty much get by, pretty easily.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's plenty of nice shops in Japan, isn't there?
Yeah.
What about just sort of as the non-teaching side of things? Is it quite an easy country to get around, or do you find that you spend an absolute fortune once you start sort of staying in hotels and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Again, it depends what you want to do, right? For me, if I'm traveling just by myself, I like, as long as it's 1 night or 2 nights, I like staying in capsule hotels.
Okay.
You wouldn't want to do it long term. Like if you went somewhere and you were staying in a city for like a week, you wouldn't want to stay in a capsule hotel for a week because that's bad. But and you've got like business kind of hotels which are usually pretty cheap. You sort of general run of the mill hotel can be quite expensive, so yeah, that is a bit more pricey. And then traveling, getting around. Most of the ticket machines now for trains and buses and stuff, they will have an English option. ATMs and stuff have nearly all got an English option as well. The trains are expensive, so if you are traveling around all by and you're living in Japan, they can be quite expensive. But they're so good. Sometimes you don't mind.
Yeah,
because it is so good and so efficient and they're so clean and
the countryside's just so beautiful, isn't it, as well? So when you're just sitting on the trains, it is lovely. There's always something to look out the window and that kind of thing.
I don't think it's extortionate prices, and it probably depends if you're visiting from a country, and if the exchange rate is not good, then yeah, it might obviously work out more expensive. If you're living and working in Japan, again, I'm quite lucky. I've got quite a good job and the pay is okay. Like so, but I never really hear of poor people going, oh, I can't get around because the buses or the trains are too expensive. So I think it's generally, a good price for everyone in Japan, you know what I mean?
And a lot of companies you work for, they would pay for your trains, wouldn't they? If you work for one company and they sort of have got in a few places around the city, they will tend to cover the cost of your train.
Every university job I've had, even the part-time ones, they pay for your transport.
Yeah, which is really good, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's really good.
So what would you say to somebody who wasn't sure whether to come work as a TEFL teacher in Japan?
Number one, do it. Just, you won't regret it. Two, like if you want to get into universities, basically you need a master's as a minimum, and that would need to be in some kind of English teaching field, especially if your first degree isn't in a teaching sort of area. So, a TEFL qualification or some sort of linguistics kind of based masters. I would say even now CELTA is getting, much more looked at now. And, I've known quite a few people in the last few years who've been teaching here for a long time, and so just before COVID, but they went to Vietnam for a month and got this CELTA, or they went to Thailand for a month and got this CELTA. and that's helped them get better jobs as well. So I think CELTA with the masters would be really good. And then basically the way the universities work is, generally speaking, when you start off, you work at like maybe 4 or 5 different places part time. So you'll have 2 classes at one place, and then you'll have 3 or 4 classes at another place, and then generally, then if you're lucky, you get offered like a full time contract somewhere. But the contracts are limited to 4 or 5 years usually. Um, but that's fine, because then what tends to happen is people sort of rotate. So you'd have one person working here for like 4 or 5 years, get to the end of the 5 years, and they'll go to this university.
You'll go that way. Okay.
And then if you're working part time, you can usually kind of slot into the circle type of thing.
Do you think Japan is probably, in terms of long-term career options, I do think Japan is probably the best place that I've been to for that. I think a lot of places I've lived at, a lot of it's felt quite temporary. Whereas with Japan, I have sort of been able to see a path to having a career as a TEFL teacher. But you do have to work for it, hence why you're doing your PhD, I think, yeah?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, you can, in that sort of merry-go-round, that circle, I know plenty of people who are, in the 60s or even retiring, and that's all they've done is that, and you can live a very good life, and, you can get good money, you can buy a house, you can get loans, all that type of stuff if you want it. And you get pretty good summers and spring vacations.
Is that even people who aren't married to Japanese people? Can they buy houses? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, usually, yeah. And then there's like the golden ticket, which don't come along very often, is the tenured jobs. And they are they're more rare, because basically once you get in, that's usually you for life, or up until 65, right? Or some of them will go 68 or 70. And basically, if you get a tenured contract, then that's you set up until retirement age. So clearly, if you get one of those, you tend to keep it.
And that sort of thing, they do require PhDs and research and this kind
of thing. So basically, you need one of two. You either need to have very good Japanese. I'm talking JLPT level 2 or even 1. The JLPT is kind of like the equivalent of IELTS kind of thing, basically. It's your Japanese language proficiency test.
So that's like 2, almost native speaker level.
2 is basically considered native speak. If you wanted to work in just run-of-the-mill office in Japan, you'd need level 2 JLPTs. Okay. Yeah. Or if you haven't got that good level of Japanese, then you would need usually a PhD. Or if you got like a boatload of research papers and presentations, that might sway it if you haven't got a PhD. Right. Like, I know quite a few people working at different universities around here, and they haven't got a PhD, but they got a tenured job. And the Japanese is good, but it's not awesome. But they've got a list as long as your arm of presentations and publications.
So it's definitely more the academic side of things if you're going to go into the university system. Whereas I guess if, like me, I went and worked for the British Council, also worked for a company called Westgate, and they didn't seem to care. The Westgate did like having a master's, but I don't think they really cared so much about the research, this kind of thing. But but I think long term, probably the options weren't there working for the British Council and working for the Westgate if you wanted to stay in Japan. Yeah, sure.
The good thing is, like in Japan, there's plenty of opportunities to do presentations and do small publications if you want. There's JOLT, which is the Japan Association of Language Teachers, which I'm a member. I'm an officer on that as well. I got the thing. JASIT, Japanese Association College. I can't remember what it's called now. But yeah, and they often have. They have like a big national conference once a year, but they also have monthly smaller conferences. You can present at them. All of that goes on the CV. You can do publications in their small little journals, and again, you just put that on your CV, and it starts adding up basically. So you can quite easily do 1 or 2 publications or presentations a year. And basically, for an entry-level university job, they'd usually only want you to have 1 or 2 presentations or publications on your list.
So I think for anyone watching this, if you're going to go down a university route, you do have to sort of realize that you've got to get your academic head on at some point.
Yes.
Well, look, I'm going to let you go because I know it's a new term. starting, I think, isn't it, this week? Yes.
Starting tomorrow, officially 1st of April. So yeah, we're doing placement tests at my university tomorrow.
Well, there we go. Thanks very much for joining us.
No
And
problem.
yeah, thank you. If you've got any questions, anybody, put them in the chat and I'll pass them on to Jamie and he'll message me with them and I'll write them in for you. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Right.
Thanks. Thanks, Jamie. Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.